Boyd Barrett and Deputy Mick Barry together.
Thanks. Taoiseach, almost everything that comes into my clinic every week is housing. And no matter how much talk we hear from the government and how many announcements we hear, and we hear a lot, it just gets worse. This week I had a woman come in to me who had a stroke 3 years ago, is partially paralysed, suffered a septic aneurysm and septicemia recently, has epilepsy, and is deaf in one ear. Her husband is her carer, and they've been living in a car for the last 4 months. Right? Another case, woman with mental health difficulties, going to Clonmara. Her child has been put into care with her mother in order that she would be able to get on the single person's emergency housing list. She lives in Dún Laoghaire, and she's told she has to accept a hostel in town, away from her family support network, or find HAPS. Right? Both of these people, and they're just two examples, have no chance of getting HAPS. None. Zero. We put a proposal to the local authority that the local authority would set up a specific team to support people like this in finding HAPS, which they cannot find. The CEO of Dún Laoghaire Down just said, I'm not doing it. Full stop. I'm not doing it, even though a motion was passed. Why not? If you believe in HAPS, then the very least you could do is ensure that there are teams put in place that would actually go out and find HAPS for people like that, instead of them having to live in cars. And I would ask that that happens. But even if you do that, do you know what the average rent for a 3-bedroom house in Dún Laoghaire is now? €2,200 a month. Even with the flexibility you're giving on HAPS, it's nowhere near. Forget it. There's no chance that HAPS is going to work. And 75,000 of the housing units you're proposing to deliver, of the 110,000, are HAPS. In Dún Laoghaire, not going to happen at all. Right? So that fantasy has to be dispelled with. And I'm appealing to you, Taoiseach, because to tell somebody who's sick, who's old, who's disabled, who's paralysed, to go out and find HAPS, you might as well just tell them, well, I won't even say it. Right? It is a nightmare you're offering them. Now, Taoiseach, how are you going to get rents down if you're depending on the private sector from 2,200? That is twice an average mortgage that people are being asked to pay. So it's not just rent certainty. I'm sorry, I think we have to go further than Sinn Féin's proposal. There has to be rent control that is linked to the affordability for people. There has to be. This is impossible. So I'm asking the Minister that, and I'm also asking the Minister, even under the basic thing, that people who are in these absolutely desperate situations of the sort I've described get every support and resource and the staffing necessary to deliver it in the local authorities, to give people every support to find something dignified, rather than just throwing them to the wolves and saying, go out and find something yourself.
Can we go to the Taoiseach, because we're practically out of time? Taoiseach, can you address
the thing is that I don't have the details of the case that you raised, but I always struggle to see the. I think you said there were 3 years. Did you say 3 years that they're waiting?
No, 4 months in a car, but she's been very ill for the last 3 months, in a housing crisis for the last.
Sure, this is not acceptable at all. Now, you asked a valid question, how are you going to get housing rents down? You've got to deal with the question of supply. And the more houses you have, the less pressure there is on the housing stock where rents increase. Clearly, government will commit and are committed to providing extensive student accommodation, which every year takes up a couple of thousand spaces or apartments or accommodation, particularly in the larger urban areas. So believe me, government see as an absolute priority the provision of housing, social housing and private sector housing, so that you can deal with the situation where so many people have not access to housing, where you are required by virtue of numbers to bring in schemes which have helped over 10,000 people now to be able to stay in the accommodation that they're in by virtue of the housing assistance payments or the increased rent subsidy. I take the point that you raise about the scale of rent levels now in Dunleer or in other locations, particularly in Dublin. But believe me, this is an issue that is being discussed both by the Cabinet Subcommittee and by the relevant departments, and hopefully all of that will come together in the action plan for housing, which I expect the Minister will be able to publish within the 100 days that he set out. And take into account the question of the recommendations from the Oireachtas Housing Committee and from the other departments and other people from around the country who have raised very practical suggestions as to how this particular challenge can actually be met. And I do hope that everybody working together can actually deal with this in the coming period. It won't happen in 6 months, but once you get a stream coming through where houses are being built, where people know they're going to be accommodated, it provides the opportunity to deal with it for once and for all.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Questions 10